Good afternoon, everyone. You're welcome today to the training or the educative program on what are KPIs, how can we develop KPIs for both clinical and non-clinical departments in the Reddington Hospital. We want to start off straight away at 2 o'clock, but I would like to know, can you all hear me? Joseph, can people hear me? Mr. Joseph, Damilola. All right, people can hear me. Great. That's good to know. Today, I'd like to introduce our speaker this afternoon. We have a very special speaker this afternoon. Her name is Dr. Damilola Mati. She's a consultant public health physician, and she'll be taking the presentation this afternoon, giving us a background of what KPIs are and how to develop KPIs or how to develop KPIs that are very crucial in measuring performance in our departments and also across the hospital as a group. So without much delay, I would like to hand over to Damilola, Dr. Mati, to proceed with her presentation. Dr. Mati?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you all so much for coming on today. I'm sorry I have not been able to share my slides right now. For some reason, I hibernated my laptop, and for some reason, it's updating. I don't understand what my laptop is doing. So I crave your indulgence to please give me about 5 minutes while I see how I will sort this out. Thank you very much.
Sincere apologies for the delay. We're just trying to work around this. Challenges like this happen once in a while when IT systems can actually cause us these kind of challenges. So just give us 1 minute. We would be back up, please.
Hello, everyone. Oh, hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think for coming to my rescue. Okay, great. Unfortunately, I will not be able to show. I have updated the slides from here, from what you can see now. So these are the old slides you would be seeing. So just try to follow me. I will speak to the slides. I probably will send the slides properly later. So please let's start again from the beginning. I'm sorry, I'm really upset about this, my laptop thing. Okay, so where are we? Right, hello, please, can everybody hear me? Hello? Hello?
We can hear you, ma'am. We can hear you, ma'am.
Fantastic. All right, so today we're discussing KPIs. For most Reddington staff, I'm sure that we've heard that term over and over and over again. A lot of times quality assurance will come to everyone and say, oh, where are your KPIs? Have you updated your KPIs, submit your KPIs, etc. So KPIs, what are they really? KPIs are key performance indices or indicators That is the full meaning of KPI, key performance indicators. So key performance indicators, please can we go back to slide 1? So key performance indicators are quantifiable measures. Okay, yeah. So they are quantifiable measures used to evaluate the success of an organization or an employee in meeting objectives for performance. So basically, it's like you set some measures, things that you can qualify as a measurable way of evaluating the success of an organization or an employee in meeting objectives for performance. They provide a way of measuring the effectiveness of an organization or employee and their progress towards achieving set goals. They demonstrate how effectively a company is achieving key business objectives. So basically, it's a way of measuring people's performances or the performance of an organization. So in healthcare, we'd say that KPIs are well-defined performance measurements that are used to monitor, analyze, and optimize all relevant healthcare processes to increase patient satisfaction. Basically, we know that for healthcare, outcome really is for the patient to be well, to go home well, and for them to be satisfied with our care. So all the things, all the measures that we use to define, all the measures that we use to measure our performance, whatever it is we do, those are, we can say those are our performance indices. Basically, like Richard Drucker would say, what gets measured gets done. So if we don't measure it, we're not sure of actually doing it. Next slide, please. Okay, so I will speak about this slide at the end of this part of it. So KPIs really are used to measure, they're used to identify where performance is good or bad. Like we said, they are performance measures. So if your performance is good, if it is bad, KPIs will help you to measure this and they'll help you to check whether they're actually meeting standards or not. They provide an analytical basis for decision making and help to focus attention on what matters most, leading to strategic and operational improvements. By this, we're saying that for making decisions, we don't expect anyone, we don't expect management, we don't expect our decision making to be off the cuff. We must have a basis for making decisions. If, for instance, now we're saying that we want to increase the number of staff in pediatrics, for instance, there must be a reason why we're doing this. We must have an analytical basis, and KPIs will help you to do this, as we'll see later on. KPIs show healthcare trends as a quantitative measure of quality. Basically, it gives you figures by which to measure what you're doing in terms of healthcare. We talk about quality as being the extent to which our objectives are met, the extent to which we meet or exceed the client satisfaction. The only way we can measure quantitatively by numbers is by setting key performance indicators. They also help to compare results with approved standards or against other similar comparable organizations. This is called benchmarking. So by the time you have your KPI set and you have the figures, you can now compare with other organizations. So I can say, for instance, patient satisfaction in Reddington is at 95%. What is patient satisfaction in St. Nicholas? What is it in Lagoon? What is it in the UK? That is benchmarking. When you begin to compare what you're doing with what others are doing. Next slide, please. So KPIs really are a form of communication. It's a form of communication between top management and middle management, between management and staff, even between departments. They're a form of like numerical communication. So if, for instance, now we take this, we're still talking about patient satisfaction, for instance. When we take our data to management, for instance, if our patient satisfaction is at 60%, It communicates to management that there's something more that needs to be done. So this is how it serves as a form of communication. Or if, for instance, now in HR, there is a high rate, a high staff turnover, it would tell HR that there is something going on. And by the time HR submits this to the board or to management, management can decipher that there's something going on. It also helps to identify whether the performance of the health service is at the desired level or not. This is where we're talking about measuring as well. And it helps to identify where improvements need to be made. And when you make such improvements, you get effectiveness, efficiency, equity, and quality. We'll keep talking about quality, quality, quality. This is why we say, as a department, please submit your KPIs, because they help us to see where you're at. So KPIs help a department or help an organization, even individuals, to see where you're at. And it provides that means of identifying whether what we're doing in terms of our health service is adequate or not. And by the time we see that they're not adequate, then we can do improvements. We can make improvements. And when we're making improvements, like we always talk about our quality improvement plans. You get your quality improvement plans from your KPIs, from looking at whether you're doing well or not, from looking at your performance. And then eventually you get the quality that you're aiming for. They also encourage transparency and accountability. KPIs show you a clear picture of what is going on. Therefore, it helps for you to be able to say, okay, this is the true state of our affairs. So it helps us to be transparent and accountable. When other people are looking at your KPIs, people who are not even in your organization, sometimes we find that some people publish their indicators and actually publish reports on what they're doing. This helps you, it gives you a form of transparency. It's open. By the time you tell people that your bed occupancy rate is 90%, nobody needs to guess. They understand what you're saying. They get where you're coming from. And it helps you also to be accountable. Next slide, please. Again, we're continuing with the purpose of KPIs. It helps us to track, like I said earlier, I've said this earlier, it helps us to track the organization's performance. And then because our business, the business of healthcare, is about lives, it helps us to reduce mistakes. KPIs helps us to reduce mistakes that could be life-threatening. For instance, now, if we have part of our KPIs in ICU, for instance, would be about infection control, respiratory infections, etc. If we're not monitoring that, we can have situations that can potentially be life-threatening, and we're not even abreast of it, we're not aware. So when you set such KPIs, it helps you to avoid potentially life-threatening mistakes. Next slide, please. Now, KPIs do not directly measure quality. You cannot, just because you set your KPIs as such, and for instance, patient satisfaction, we say is 95%, that does not necessarily mean the quality of healthcare in that organization is at 95% or is that fantastic. Rather, KPIs make an inference about the quality of care. So if we say patient satisfaction is at 95%, it helps us to infer that, okay, there must be something that we're doing right, or there may be things that we're doing right to get the quality of care in Reddington to 95%. And like I said, they're inferences, so it helps you to make an inference. It gives you an idea, but then also it helps us to keep an eye on the deficits or the deficiencies. So the KPIs also act as alert systems. If, for instance, now in the first quarter, our patient satisfaction was at 95%, second quarter it was at 98%, third quarter it's at 60%. That is an alert. It tells us that something must have gone wrong between the second and the third quarters. So KPIs act as alert systems as well. Next slide, please. Now, this part, I'm sorry, it will not go, I'm not going to speak to it the way it's on the slides, but I hope you can follow me. To develop KPIs, a team should start with the basics. What is your goal? What are you trying to achieve? Goals have the nature of being broad. Goals have the nature of being long-term. So here, even though I said objectives here, like I said, I have updated the slides. The first thing you do is to define what your goal is. So for instance, business development can say, we want to become a leader in the healthcare space, or want to be a leader in the healthcare space. But that is a broad goal. Now we need to break it down to objectives. Or let's say lab can also say, we want to provide efficient laboratory services. What does that mean? That is a broad goal. Now we now need to break it down. So if lab, for instance, says we want to become the most efficient lab in Lagos State, what does that mean for the lab? One, we'll have to look at things like turnaround time. Your patients cannot come to the lab and get their results 3-4 weeks late, or be sitting down from morning to night to get a pregnancy test, to get the result of a pregnancy test. So you have to break your goal down. Say, okay, what are the things that will make us efficient? So if your goal is efficiency, what are things that will make us efficient? So you're looking at, okay, turnaround time, missing results, incorrectly labeled samples. So you now write all those things down. By the time you write those things down, you now begin to get a clear picture of where you're going to. Now, for KPIs to be set, it's not an individual effort, it's a team effort. While brainstorming can lead to, sometimes they say it's not really good to brainstorm on KPIs because sometimes you get KPIs indicators that are all over the place. However, it's best to streamline. A team still needs to work on it together. And it is an iterative process, meaning that it is something that you keep going, you keep going back to. Now, it is, like I said, the fact-finding mission. I mean fact-finding by saying, okay, what are the things we want to achieve? How do we break it down? So by doing this, you are gaining an understanding of, okay, what processes will help you to attain your goal, or what objectives will help you to attain your goal, and what processes you now need to measure. Next slide, please. Okay, so I have spoken about this part, the desired goal and outcome. Okay, so I've talked about HR, rather business development, saying, okay, they want to be a market leader and trying to become the market leader. So if business development says they want to become a market leader, their objective may be, let's increase revenue by 10%. For instance, like I was saying, if it is lab, we can say, okay, 98% of our objective will be that 98% of samples are correctly identified. Or we can say that 98% of samples of results are returned within the turnaround time. So that is how you establish your objective. And when you are looking at your objective, you have to ask yourself, what will your target be? Like if you notice, I said 98%, I put a number to it. 98% of samples should be correctly identified. Now we need to ask ourselves, is this attainable? And when should it be accomplished? We can say, okay, 98% of samples run on a daily basis. Or we can say, business development saying they want to increase revenue by 10%. That can become something that will say, okay, 10% by the end of the year or by the end of the quarter. And how are we going to monitor this progress? So this target should be realistic. because we know that changes to business processes do take time to implement. So these changes have to be, these targets have to be realistic. They have to be things that we know that we can attain. Now, in the initial stages of KPI monitoring, right now we're talking about setting the KPIs. We have to put it in mind that we have to have long-term targets, but mid-term monitoring. Next slide, please. So, next slide, please. Now that we have broken it down, the next thing we need to do is we need to build the formula. So, for instance, if we say post-CS infection rate, like I have here on this slide, it will be number of infections over total CS times 100. Now, some of these indicators, they may be things that you need to combine data for to get a calculated formula. And sometimes there may be a single metric. Like, for instance, we can say, okay, we want to increase the number of patients in OPD to 1,000 per day. That is a single measure. That is something that you don't need to calculate for. It is just a single number. We're going to 1,000. However, for some of them, they rely on a combination of, data brought together in a calculated formula, which is why I said you need to first of all know what your objective is. So, for instance, let's look at correctly identified samples, like I've been talking about in the lab. If we look at that, so we now know that one, we need to know how many samples are we running per day. We must have a way to check to see whether these samples are correctly labeled or not. And then we must know, okay, who filled the forms, how did they fill the forms, etc. So this will be an aggregation of data. And then you now get the formula for it. So like now here I have post-infection rates, post-CS infection rate. So first of all, we need to know how many cesarean sections do we do in Reddington. Then we need to know, okay, how many people had infections from the cesarean section. Since it is a percentage that we're looking at, we say times 100. So the number of infections over total CS times 100. So as you set your objectives, you look at it properly, you look at your objective properly. Let's say you have one objective, you look at it properly to say, okay, what are the things I would need to measure? What are the things that would make up this objective? So that's how you build your formula. Unless, like I said earlier on, it's a single metric. It is just a number that you're trying to count. Please go back to the last slide, the slide before this one. Okay, so after you now determined what your formula is, you now begin to collect the data. Like I said, we now need to look at where are CS, the number of cesarean sections within Reddington, where they are documented. Now, the data may be available automatically. Like maybe we may have the data in Sukra, you may be able to see numbers directly from Sukra, or they may be hidden in reports. Like in QA, we do what we call a documentation audit. For us to know how many doctors sign properly, for us to know how many times initial assessments are filled, we have to go through case notes. So this is one of those that we can say are hidden in reports or databases. In this case, the folders, the files serve as our databases. So we now need to go into the folders to say, okay, how many doctors, and we now begin to count, or we now need to check off manually. So we need to pull this data together to calculate our KPI. Now, your data will also need to be pulled together at regular intervals for reporting in a central place. So for instance, we're saying, okay, number of CS, like I said earlier on. So there is a register. At the end of the month, There's another place where we can document, say, okay, these are the total number of cesarean sections in Reddington. Or in the case of QA documentation, we can have a central place where we say, okay, for the month of January, 6% of our doctors documented properly. For the month of April, 8% documented properly. So you will still need to pull all this data together for reporting in a central place. And when you have that, you now realize that it's easier for you to pick up your data to use for the calculation of your KPI, etc. Next slide, please. So now that you've done this, you've gotten your objectives, you've broken your objectives down, you've gotten your formula, you've retrieved all the information you need from the databases, you've collected your data, and then you now have your results. At the end of it, when you have your results, you now present your data. So you need to present your data in such a manner that it is understandable to others. People who don't even know anything about your data should be able to understand your data. So we're talking about the use of graphs and charts, for instance. Yes, your data can be presented as tables. For most of us, we present our data as tables. Then it gets to QA, where Mr. James kindly helps us to put it into graphs. But we'd like to see everybody get to the next level, wherein you can actually summarize your data, your KPIs, and present it as graphs and charts. Now, we've already said that KPIs are a means of communication. So imagine if, for instance, business development was having a meeting and they have their KPIs as charts, and they're having a meeting, an intradepartmental meeting, and they can look at it. For someone who didn't go to the field with them, or maybe they're having a meeting with another department, all the person needs to see is the graph, and the person will understand what you're talking about. Next slide, please. Now, KPIs are not static. We need to review the KPIs on a daily, monthly or quarterly or annually basis. Sorry, I'm still trying to see if I can open my slides so that you can actually see the new things I have on it. You need to check your KPIs regularly. So however it is that you have chosen to check it, if you're looking at it on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, that's fine. But you need to remember that your KPIs are not static. Your KPIs, so you keep checking your progress against, the indicators you have set. So like the example I gave earlier on saying that you could have a situation when client satisfaction was at 90% earlier on, then it came to 95, then it came to 99. And then if, for instance, you have 99%, you have 100% consecutively, you may then need to say, okay, maybe we've reached a point. Yes, I know that quality is a continuous journey. You're not going to ditch client satisfaction. You're not going to stop checking because it can fall. But while you are still measuring it, it may not be the entire focus of your attention anymore. And not all KPIs are successful. You may actually set indicators and realize that they're not working for you. Next slide, please. Those KPIs that are not working for you may just be because some of those objectives, the objectives you set, they were unachievable in the first place. And it is only by tracking them that you realize whether they were achievable or not achievable. If, for instance, now Reddington Hospitals decides to set a goal saying, okay, we want everybody in Etiosa local government to be healthy, a broad goal like that, it is beyond us. there's not too much that we can do to ensure that every single person in Etiosa is healthy, because what being healthy is a very broad thing as well. So that is beyond us. So we can realize if we set that kind of objective, for instance, we realize, oh, that is not a good objective. But because we keep going back to the KPIs and we're updating them, we realize that, okay, that is not a good objective. And sometimes if you're not checking your KPIs, if you're forgetting them, you risk chasing objectives that are no longer relevant to your business. Classic case in point. Imagine in radiology, we're still saying, oh, how many X-ray films were developed? If we're still trying to count the number of X-ray films developed in radiology, then we know that that is not in any way a smart objective. Because at the end of the day, we don't use films for radiology anymore. So you risk chasing objectives that are no longer relevant to your business if you do not continue updating your KPIs. Next slide, please. So we've talked about setting the KPIs. We've talked about updating them, going back to them. You know, in the beginning, I said it's an iterative process. It's something that you keep going back to. So we don't just set KPIs one time and decide that is it. So how do we know that we've set good KPIs? I'm sure most of us know this acronym SMART. Now, SMART, as we all know, means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. I'm sure that most of us know that. Now, when we're talking about being smart, your objectives being smart, we're asking your indicators rather being smart. We're asking, do your indicators convey at a glance what you're measuring? For instance, that example I gave about turnaround time. Straight on, just looking at it, you know what that objective is measuring. You know it is measuring turnaround time. So your KPIs, your indicators should clearly communicate what management is doing. And for us as an organization, we know that we have like different business units. So the lab is a unit, radiology is a unit, business development is a unit. So when I say management here, it is even down to departmental level. So we can say what that department is doing. So your indicators should show clearly what that department is doing. And then they should be measurable. They should be, they have to be expressed as objective values. You can't just say it should be low. You can't just say, okay, so we should have a low infection rate. They must be measurable, which is why, for instance, earlier on, we looked at the formula and we talked about putting a number to it. Now, also, when you're looking at measurable, you must also, you know, we talked about data collection. You have to also know, do you have reliable data? If, for instance, you're trying to measure turnaround time and nobody is registering the samples when the samples come in, nobody's checking to that whatever data you collect will not be judged as reliable because you have one end of the data, you don't have the other end of the data. So also, where is the data being collected? If you can't find reliable data, is it possible for you to start collecting reliable data? Are there things that you can do to make your data measurable? Achievable, is it something that the organization can control or not? Next slide, please. Also, we want to know, like we said, are they smart? Does the indicator measure the most important results of the activity? We talked about turnaround time. We talked about at the end of the day, when you put all your indicators together, we said the goal is for lab to become more efficient. By the time you put all your indicators together, all your objectives together, does it speak to lab becoming more efficient or not? Now, time bound. Time bound. Is there a deadline for achieving the performance indicator? You know, we talked about whether it is weekly, whether it is monthly, whether it is quarterly. So For instance, business development, using that example, can say they want to be market leaders by the end of the first quarter or by the end of the year. So data need to be reported at sufficiently regular intervals. So that's what you're checking. What are the intervals like? Are the intervals regular enough to support tracking and management and decision making by management? Now, we've talked about SMART, but now to help your KPIs exceed the expectation, you have to make them smarter. So there's an ER to add. So it's next steps that evaluate and re-evaluate. So after you've done everything, you've collected your KPIs, you've gone back to it, you've looked at them, you now evaluate them. After you evaluate, you re-evaluate. So it's like in quality, we talk about what we call a PDSA cycle. A plan, do, some people say PDC, plan, do, study, act, or plan, do, check, act. And it's a cycle because you keep going back to it. By the time you get to the study or the check aspect of it, you act, you make a decision, and you carry out activities, and then you go back. So it's the same thing with this. You evaluate and reevaluate. So these are the ways that your KPIs will continue to remain meaningful and relevant. Next slide, please. So at this point, I have talked quite a lot. I'd like to know, do we have any examples? I'd like us to use the chat box, please. Can we put examples of the kind of KPIs we collect in our departments in the chat box? I'm giving you examples here. Examples of KPIs here would include things like hospital bed occupancy rate. This should reflect the ability of the hospital to properly care for patients. This measure is useful in guiding and planning operational management of hospital beds. Thank you, Mr. Randy. I can see here saying equipment downtime. Yes, so equipment downtime, you can look at that as a KPI, but how do you actually make it an indicator? So sir, you said equipment downtime, but you haven't given us a target and you haven't given us a time. So kindly help us update that. I'm waiting for more, please. Can we have more suggestions in the chat box as to KPIs that you may collect in your department or KPIs that you think, examples of KPIs? Do we have any more? Thank you very much, sir. So, yes, specified equipment to be available 98% of time. Fantastic. So, yes, and also it said downtime to be repaired within 48 hours. So I can say that, I can also add to that downtime to be repaired within 48 hours by saying 90% of equipment downtime to be repaired within 48 hours. Thank you very much, sir. I can see Nasir also, and Nasir saying, oh, okay. Biomedical engineer response to equipment breakdown. Okay. Right, okay, I can also see, okay, this is probably Dr. Ojo, 95% of discharges to be completed before 12 noon. That is fantastic. So there is a time to it. There is a target also. Favor says turnaround time KPI in the lab. Yes, so what will be your turnaround time? The example I gave says, okay, so that you should be able to achieve 98% of all tests meeting turnaround time every day. So that is a daily one. Thank you very much. All these are coming in. Number of daily patient walk-in, that's marketing. Yes, so number of walk-in patients. Do you want to say something like, you want to increase your targets, have 98, or rather increase your number of daily patient walk-ins by a certain number? Okay, I can see this is probably from the Ijoma is probably from pharmacy. She says 90% of prescriptions in which time tracker was filled. Okay, yes, Mr. Debo is saying wait time to see doctor should be 30 minutes. Response time to complaints resolution, not more than 2 weeks. Fantastic. So I think generally here, we do have some idea of what our KPIs are supposed to look like. Most of the KPIs that have been sent here, thank you all, everyone that sent something to the chat box. Thank you all for your responses. Everyone here has those elements, so you know what your objective is. Sometimes, so for some people, what you need to add is a target, maybe the time frame or the percentage that you're looking at. So the other example we have here is average length of ICU stay. Now, we also need to know that our KPIs must have impact. Like for instance, now this average length of ICU stay might reflect complications such as nosocomial infections, which are more prevalent in ICU. So if, for instance, the average length of ICU stay is very, we talked about benchmarking, is very long compared to other hospitals. So if, for instance, Lagoon is doing, another hospital is doing ICU stay of 3 days, and we're doing ICU stay rather of 7 days, then we must begin to look at it. Remember, we said KPIs serve as alerts and they help you to look at your processes. There may be a reflection that there's something going on in the ICU, something like maybe ventilator-associated pneumonia. Then mortality rates, and that's another example of KPIs, number of deaths and mortality rates. These will directly reflect effectiveness of early disease detection. Again, this speaks to something that we're supposed to do in Reddington, our REDs. So are we using REDs or not? This indicator will also help us. Again, like I said, departments will come together as a team to specify what they are going to measure. Departments will come up as a team to let us know what their key performance indicators are. Next slide, please. So I still have other examples of KPIs here. Total number of OPD patients, that reflects the efficiency of work in the outpatient department. Average waiting time, like what Debo said, reflects the accessibility of care, and the number of theater cases booked, number of theater cases cancelled, etc. So all these will help us to see how our processes are, what our service delivery in Reddington is like. Thank you all for listening. I sincerely apologize. These are not the slides I was meant to use, but for some reason, my laptop refused to cooperate. I left it on, and I don't know what happened to it. But thank you very much for listening, albeit to this presentation now. I think I saw somebody had a question. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Any questions, any contributions or comments? Okay, so I have one question here. It says, thank you. Okay, well, I'll just read it. Thank you for a beautiful presentation. I have seen instances where people, instead of collecting data for KPI, the data is nothing different from activities, performance, or just operational numbers. In order to maximize this training, can you further differentiate KPI data from regular operational numbers, or tell us how to determine a proper KPI? Oh my. So in this question, I'm hoping this question was at the beginning of the training because I'm hoping that I've been able to tell you how to determine KPIs. But yes, sometimes we just collect numbers. Sometimes we just submit data. Mr. James and I are always looking at it. Sometimes we just submit data. So if, for instance, now OPD keeps telling us how many patients came to the outpatient department, how many patients they had every day, that is just a number. But we said, now, what is your goal? So the thing with KPIs, it has to start from the goals. You have to know what are your goals. So if we say we want to increase number of walking patients, like somebody said, in OPD, what are the elements? One, it means that turnaround wait time has to reduce. So we'll now collect data for wait time. How do we collect data for wait time? So first of all, what was our wait time? What is our wait time? So we'll now say, okay, we want to reduce wait time, like what Debo said, to 30 minutes for each client. So that means that we need to start collecting data on when did the patient walk in. So we may have a registrar, may be able to get it off Supra. When did the patient come in? when did the patient see the doctor? We now collect that for a while. And then it gives us a figure to say, okay, what is the average wait time? So yes, people sometimes collect just numbers, but I'm hoping that by now you understand how to actually set the KPIs. I have another question here. Okay, please, whose responsibility is it to set the KPI? Staff, line manager, QA, or HR? So now, remember in the beginning, we said we can have individual KPIs for staff, we can have departmental KPIs, we can have organizational KPIs. So the KPIs can be set at different levels. So HR can set KPIs for people that are coming in. You're employing new people, you can set HR can set KPIs for those. But for a department, it will be a team effort. The manager of the department with the team members. So it depends on what KPIs you're looking at. If it's individual, like for instance, for employment, HR can set. But if it's the departmental KPI, then the department work as a team to set. If it is like the whole organizational KPI, then it may be set at board or senior management level. Do we have any more questions? Hello? Hello? Oh my.
Hello, we can hear you, Dr. Mati.
Right.
We can hear you.
I wasn't sure if I was talking to myself or not.
We
Okay,
can
so
hear you.
are there any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening. Have a fantastic afternoon. Dr. Jumaki, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mati, for this very wonderful presentation. Sharp, short, very precise, just like a lady's miniskirt. We really appreciate it. It was a wonderful and eye-opening presentation. Now, with this knowledge of how to set KPIs and the information we have obtained, we would like each department, I know some departments have submitted KPIs, all right? We would like each department to sit down as a group led by the HOD of the unit to please review their KPIs again, all right? And if you are comfortable with what you have, to kindly share, all right? It's also important, just as she mentioned, Dr. Martin mentioned, that it's important to note that as an organization, the board and the senior management team are looking for certain key performance indicators, and they're going to set it from top and share it with us very soon. Most of the HODs that will be attending the away day will most likely get a copy of the kind of KPIs the board and the management is interested in. However, this does not stop us from also measuring other things we want to measure in our departments. KPIs are not only for the clinical department, it's not only for pediatrics, it's not only for O&G, it's not only for internal medicine. Even as the food service department should have KPIs, laundry should have KPIs, housekeeping should have KPIs, the drivers should have KPIs, engineering team should have KPIs. Everybody should have one thing or the other they're measuring to see how you're improving your performance. Whatever cannot be measured should not be done. That's a quote Dr. Mati put on her slide earlier on. It is very, very crucial. At this point in time, I'd like to invite, I can see with us this afternoon, we have Mr. Andy. Mr. Andy, any comments, any contributions to the presentation? I don't know if you'll be able to speak at this point in time. Mr. Joseph, can you unmute everyone or enable Mr. Andy to speak? Mr. Joseph, is that possible? All right, it might not be possible. So we recognize the presence of Mr. Andy, Dr. Oshibamowo, and every HOD in this meeting and other members from different branches. We still have some comments coming in. Please, thank you for the presentation. This is from Mr. Vincent. Thank you for this presentation. In respect to patient complaints, mostly of our tariff, which we face mostly on the field, how can we measure our performance based on this? So you're looking at a complaint, specifically looking at tariff, all right? Dr. Mati, would you like to address this?
Okay, yes, please, thank you. So if you're looking at tariffs, now the thing is, it means that you're saying that, I'm trying to find the question again. Okay. Okay, yes. Patients complain mostly about tariffs. It's difficult to measure your KPIs based on this, because this is something that, okay, so if you keep measuring, you go to the field and you find out about your tariffs and you find out about client complaints. Now the complaints, if you are trying to find out about client complaints, it will not just be about tariffs. I'm sure you have a host of other things, and then you find them complaining a lot about the tariffs. Now, that is an indicator. You can't measure, but you may not be able to measure your performance strictly, because it's either, so that's the thing with KPIs. When you go back to the drawing board, you're asking yourself, are you going to reduce your tariffs because of these complaints? I'm not sure what the likely answer will be. However, as a department, you can then say, okay, why don't we have like hybrid packages or different packages for this? So yes, in a way, you can use it as a measure, but not necessarily of your performance. You can't use it to measure your performance, because this is not something, this is a set, this is something that is set by the organization. It's not something to do with how you're performing exactly. I'm not sure if you understand, if Mr. Vincent will understand what I'm saying. It's a tariff that has been set. Okay, you are saying this is how much you want people to pay. So yes, you can go to the field, but it's not necessarily your performance. But you can measure it. You can use it as an indicator for, maybe not for your performance, but you can use it as an indicator for something else. You can say indicator for uptake of your services, for instance, yes, or maybe not performance. So yes, it is something you can measure, but not as an indicator of your performance.
All right, thank you so much for that contribution. All right, it's an indicator that you can use it to measure and use it for other things, just as you mentioned. There's another question, and I like this. It's from an anonymous attendee. The car indicator says I should use my seatbelt, and I ignore. There was an accident and it was fatal because I ignored the indicator signaling. If you identify KPIs, collate it, and don't pay attention to the message, it is communicating the problem that the result will be fatal. Not a question, but a comment. Thank you, Dr. Martin. Would you like to respond to this, Dr. Martin?
Oh, yes, I think that is quite apt. This person is talking about monitoring your KPIs. As the person said, seatbelt, indicator light came on, accident occurred. It's like what we said about KPIs being alerts. They serve as alerts to say there's something going on. So thank you very much, whoever this person is. It's a very apt contribution.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Mati. Even though we're measuring it and you're reporting such indicators, it is still very important to continue communicating it with your superiors. It doesn't mean if you don't get a response, you should stop measuring it. You keep on presenting it and re-emphasizing that it is a risk that something fatal could occur or something, an adverse event or a never event could occur. Never stop reporting, never get tired of showing your performance and your indicators. Very, very crucial. All right, I think, is there another question or another comment?
Yeah, two more. There's one question from Mrs. Inogo here.
Okay, please go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, so it says, can we measure our data collection and hospital information to the local government? If I understand what you're asking me, you want to know if we can measure our performance with regards to sending data to the local government. Yes, we can. We can ask ourselves, there's a timeline. I know that you're supposed to report the data by the 4th day of every month. So we can measure our performance by saying how many times did we submit our data, how many times did we exceed the timeline. So yes, we can measure that as an indicator as well. It can be an indicator in terms of our response to government, our feedback to government. Then there's also something else here that Mr. Andy said. He said KPIs are hierarchical. So a 10% increase in revenue breaks down to revenue generation and revenue retention, which relates to customer satisfaction, etc. So we need a coordinated approach in setting KPIs. I very much agree. So what Sandy has done here is saying, okay, for instance, they say they want to have a 10% increase in revenue. Break it down to objectives. 1, revenue generation, 2, revenue retention. And revenue retention relates to customer satisfaction. So that shows you how, like you said, it's hierarchical. You break it down and then you see all the other things that you need, all the objectives that you need to attain that's your goal. Thank you very much, sir. I believe that is all. I think we've answered everything here.
Thank you very much. I think this is 1 hour well spent. I would like to appreciate each and every one of you for attending this event. Thank you so much for spending this 1 hour with the Quality Assurance Department. We appreciate it on a Saturday. We really, really appreciate you all. And thank you. Feel free. Our doors are always opened. If you have any challenges with your KPIs, feel free to reach out to any QA staff, and we'll be there to support you in development of KPIs or developing the KPIs or setting it. Thank you all, and I wish you all a pleasant evening and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye. Bele, bele.